worked at a pretty well-known record store in Los Angeles in the mid-90s, and this one time, a guy walked in to apparently check out some CDs. He's milling about, and we make eye contact a few times. Then he came up to ask me about certain artists and albums. He started dropping little personal details, then asking me the same thing in turn. Stuff like where I lived in LA, how long I've lived here, if I was single, stuff like that. He then walks out without buying anything. He didn't even ask for my number. Might sound full of myself, but I figured that he would, and when he didn't, I was left thinking, why did he even come in, and why did he ask me all those weird questions? Anyway, about a week later, I was on my way home when my car broke down. It was incredibly hot outside, and I was cursing the whole way when I had to walk several miles to get to a payphone, which just so happened to be outside the elementary school I went to, but that's neither here nor there. I called a cab and hung up the phone, and after sitting a moment, it started ringing. Weird, but I figured it might be the cab company calling me back, so I picked it up. Then I heard a person on the other end say, "Bad luck about your car. Talk to me until your ride gets there." I remember recognizing the voice from somewhere, and it definitely wasn't the person that I'd spoken to at the cab company because they had a certain accent, and this guy was straight up American. So I asked who is this? And the person just laughed in reply, and that's when it hit me who it was. It was the weirdly curious guy from the record store. It made absolutely no sense to me at the time, but thinking about it later, he had to have followed me from home, trailed me from the car, called the school or something to ask for the payphone number and then called it. This is at a time when cell phones weren't widely available, and he didn't seem like some hotshot, so I legitimately have zero clue where he was calling from or how he knew the right time to call. It was quite a busy gas station down the street, and maybe it had just been a coincidence that he'd spotted me from there or something, but I remembered that at the time, and the more I tried to work it out, the more I started kind of freaking out. Obviously, I just slammed down the phone and walked someplace else, but I did so with my head on a swivel the whole freaking time. I certainly count myself very lucky, not just because the guy seemed to back off after that little incident, but because a few months later, his picture was in the Times for being convicted on kidnapping charges. Seeing that was even scarier than the random payphone call because I realized that the kidnapping victim could have very easily have been me. I was off work after an 8-hour shift when I decided to go drive around the city. Now this is my little habit of mine when my day off is the next day. Before I go home, I drive for basically 30 minutes around the city before I go home and basically just wasting some gas and exploring. As I was driving around the block, keep in mind the entire time this was unfolding, I was driving very slowly, and about 100 meters away in front of me, I noticed a guy jumping out of the second floor balcony of the apartment. And he'd seemed to be in a hurry too. I saw another guy exit his car from the passenger seat. Now my curiosity got the better of me and decided to stop at the side of the road, turn my car off and watch them from the distance. Now if my eyes didn't deceive me, I saw the guy who jumped off of the truck entered the driver's side of the car and started it. The other guy, meanwhile, lights up something, and it was only the glow of the flames when I saw that it was a Molotov. I watched as the man positioned himself perfectly for a couple of seconds and threw it to that room that he jumped out of. The place became engulfed in flames, and as soon as it grew bigger, the two men decided to drive off as quickly as they could out of there, and all of this happened in just a matter of minutes. Now strangely, I watched from a distance as the flames grew larger and larger, basically burning the rest of the building. I decided not to call the cops and simply left by going in a different direction, not to get caught in the crossfire of whatever this might turn out to be. It was the next 2 weeks that I got the full context about the arson with the local news. Keep in mind, I saw this entire ordeal unfold with my very own eyes, and there was no mistaking it at all. It turned out that the two men behind this fire were arrested 5 days afterward due to the fact that the police managed to get a hold of probably the CCTV footage, and I A person also witnessed the incident and managed to identify them and spoke to police. Coincidentally, they managed to pull that driver over, and he was actually arrested for possession of drugs and was later identified. The passenger, meanwhile, was arrested because he decided to vandalize a car not far from the apartment. Now, the reason for the arson was apparently about a dispute between the tenant and the one guy. The other man was just an accomplice, and he asked to come along. Apparently, the tenant was out of town at the time when it happened, and they decided to burn his place down. Unbeknownst to them, they actually burnt the entire apartment complex, and thus creating more damage to them when they got arrested. To this day, I somewhat regretted not calling the police when I saw it happen, maybe because I'm fearful this was something bigger and that me reporting it could possibly get me killed. But with some sheer luck that there was another guy watching this unfold from the other building, I'm just thankful everyone was safe and no one was hurt. For clarification, I'm a female and this story happened around 2015. I also went to school in a small southern town where news spreads very fast. When this story happened, my friends and I were juniors in high school. We were kind of the nerdy outcasts at my school, and we tended to plan get-togethers around holidays. Usually we would just play video games, order pizza, all that good stuff. We were planning our usual Halloween get-together for the year when gossip was spreading around about a huge Halloween party that was taking place just outside of town. My friends and I weren't interested, but a lot of girls at our school were. Guys from other high schools were inviting them and a lot of other teenage girls to the party. Me and a couple of my friends were invited too, but like I said, we just weren't interested. The party was said to have a ton of drugs and alcohol at it, and my friends were pretty clean and sober. Though because of how small and boring and religious our town was, a lot of teens were willing to get involved in a little bit of trouble, especially if it involved drugs and alcohol. After Halloween, we had police at our school asking us questions to specific students and even interrupting our classes to talk to people. Turns out it wasn't a harmless Halloween party hosted by some teenage boys. It was actually a party hosted by creepy old men who paid teenage boys to lure teenage girls to their house. They were found out because some girls tried to leave the party and were stopped by one of the men. A girl had brought her boyfriend, and he stepped in to try and help her. The man got so furious by this, he ended up beating the life out of the boyfriend to the point of unconsciousness. A neighbor close by, where the party was, called the police and the men were swiftly arrested. When police searched the house, there were drugs, guns, and voicemails talking about kidnapping and selling some of the girls at the party. They even found text messages where they were taking pictures of the girls at the party for approval of whoever they were talking to. The arrests and evidence found spread like wildfire in our town. People, especially parents, were terrified. I remember some kids at our school moved away after the incident. I graduated college recently, and the story came up again at another Halloween get-together with my friends. It's still terrifying to think what might have happened if the police weren't called. I'm a dog walker for a small but busy company. I have one client in a somewhat nicer neighborhood that I go to twice a week in the mornings. Like most people who use dog walkers, they use a lockbox. They decided to keep theirs behind a vase next to their apartment door. It was already a busy Monday for me, and I was in a bit of a rush, and I was hoping to get Maya, their Bernedoodle puppy, by 9:45 a.m. so I could stay on track for the day. After finding parking, which is usually terrible, I made my way up the apartment to their door. I wrapped my hand around the vase, intending to grab the lockbox. Nothing. Wasn't alarmed at first. Sometimes owners forget to put out lockboxes. Not super common, but it happens. I look around a bit more but have no luck, so I text the owner. I'll call her Kay for her privacy. Usually when I do text her, I get no response since she's so busy, but I text her anyway, asking her where the lockbox could possibly be, since it's not in its usual spot. About 5 minutes pass without a response, and I'm honestly getting a bit irritated. I already have a busy day driving all around the city, and now I'm going to run behind. So I start knocking. There's a chance her husband might be home, and sometimes he is. I knock about 3 separate times until I hear some shuffling upstairs. So someone is home. It takes a bit of time, but I hear someone making their way down the stairs. It's taking a bit of time, but someone is coming down. The door opens. It's not Kay, nor is it her husband. A man stands in front of me. He's only wearing a white towel that's barely hanging off his hips. He's holding Maya in his arms, and he looks extremely caught off guard. I'm confused and also caught off guard, but not quite horrified. Maybe they were having a visitor stay with them, or maybe someone was having an affair. Maybe that's why the lockbox was absent. Hey, I'm here to take Maya for a walk. He lets her run into the hallway and hands the leash and collar over, which are always on the staircase railing. I ask him to please give me the lockbox to keep outside since I need to get back inside, and he gives it to me. We head out for our walk, and I'm still a bit flabbergasted. Did I just walk in on an affair? Was he a visitor? It wasn't too out of the ordinary. Sometimes clients forget to mention they have guests. Then during our walk, I get a message from my manager. Do you have Maya? And then she calls. I pick up. I let her know I have Maya and we're on our walk. She says she got a weird message from Kay, her owner. She had stated a man came by earlier saying he was the new dog owner and needed their lockbox code. I guess her husband gave him the code. We never set up a new walker. Ever. I then let her know about the man in the towel when I got to the apartment and how the lockbox was gone. Told her I wasn't sure if I had walked in on something or if he was a guest. Well, he wasn't a secret lover or a guest. He was not supposed to be there. Police were called immediately. I was told to absolutely not go back into the home. I called Kay's husband as he was on his way back over. Kay was en route from work. Kay's husband tells me he feels so stupid for telling the man the code and believing him, but that he was in a rush out the door and didn't assume anything bad. I continued walking down the street, quite a busy major street, and then I spot a familiar man across the street. He runs across towards me. He's holding a beer in his hand. Hi, doggy, he goes. And it was the same man from inside the apartment, and then he ran back across the street. I immediately turned the other direction into one of the side streets and called Kay's husband. He was nearing the neighborhood and tells me he just saw the man matching the description. Once Kay and her husband arrived, we went upstairs to scope out the apartment, expecting some items to be missing. Nothing. Everything perfectly in place, untouched. The only thing different was some dirty water in the shower that had been used. I was happy no one was hurt, nor was Maya. I was happy I wasn't hurt, but who was he? And how did he know they had a dog walker? This happened a couple of days ago and it's still bothering me. I'm sitting in my living room reading. My back window is slightly open. I heard a noise and thought it was my cat making high-pitched noise. She came in the room and sat with me, and then I heard the noise again, and I realized it wasn't her, so I got up and walked to the open window. I listened closely and hear what sounded like a woman yelling. It's very difficult to tell where the noise is coming from because of the way the apartment complex is designed. I sit for a few minutes near the window and don't hear anything again. I go back to reading. About 45 minutes later, I hear the yelling again. I rush to my back window and clearly hear a woman say, "I just want to go home." At this point, I call the police. Long story short, they come, ask a few questions, sit in my apartment trying to listen, and don't hear anything. After about 15 minutes, they leave and tell me to call if I hear anything else, and I've not heard anything else since then. What's really bothering me is the thought that someone has a woman trapped in their apartment. When he realized the police were here, he told her or forced her to stay quiet. If the police don't hear anything, they can't just enter a person's home. The fact that I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from makes it even worse. I'm just worried that she's now being punished for bringing the cops to the house. I'm also a little worried that this person will figure out that I was the one who called. The police weren't exactly discreet in coming to my home, asking questions and looking out my back window. I decided to go hiking in Wekiva State Park. It's a place that I'm extremely familiar with. The weather has been awful lately, so I haven't been kayaking. My time in the state park has been spent kayaking, and I was the only person out there because the weather wasn't that great. It was on the Orange Trail, maybe 2 miles in, when all of a sudden I had the feeling of being watched. I have a sixth sense for this. If I feel I'm being watched, there's an 80% chance that I probably am. I stopped and watched for a second. As I started back in, I suddenly saw quick-paced movement out in the brush, maybe 50 yards from where I was. Something was trying to avoid being seen. It was weird, but I continued on. As I continued down the trail, I continued to feel watched. All of a sudden, as I'm walking, I hear maniacal laughing out in the brush, maybe 20 yards to my left. Now, I was the only person around. I hadn't seen another person in the entire park, and this really unsettled me. I quickly moved on. I tried to pull it out of my mind, thinking I was just imagining things. Maybe 2 minutes later, I hear the same maniacal laughter off to my left. This time, it was a bit closer. I decided to pick up the pace substantially. Less than a minute later, I hear the laughter right behind me. There's an enormous amount of rustling and noise coming from the brush. I realized whatever this was right behind me, and I ran. I didn't look back, I just ran. Something was telling me to run and run as far as I could. Within a mile, I was sucking wind. I had put every ounce of energy into my escape. I ended up becoming too weak to run, and I stopped for some rest. I didn't want to get bull rushed, so I turned around, facing the direction that I had been running from, and took a knee. I was starting to calm down, but I still didn't feel safe, and I told myself I had to keep going. As I struggled to my feet, I spotted something in the brush, a dark leather wrap. I unfolded it and found 3 extremely sharp knives, like butcher knives, the type of knife that you would use to stab someone, and they seemed fresh too. You could tell that they had been dropped there within the day. I allowed an audible yelp when I realized what was inside the sheath. Really manly, I know. All of a sudden, every ounce of fear came rushing back. My body was telling myself to be very, very afraid. I knew I had to keep moving, and I jumped back up and ran back to civilization. I didn't grab the knives because I felt that it would add an immense amount of risk to an already dangerous situation. I had the feeling of being watched until I was a half mile from the trailhead. Something was out there. Something knew I was out there. I'm not afraid of anyone. People don't have the ability to freak me out. The fact that my body was telling me to be very, very afraid and to keep moving just felt terrifying. It was a primal response that I just couldn't turn off. We've been going to a local pool for 6+ weeks for swimming lessons. This was the last week, and as soon as I had my son, he's 16 months old, dressed and ready to go, an old 70-year-old plus lady walked in. She immediately, almost before turning the corner, said, "How old is he?" I love showing off my baby boy, but she was immediately creeping me out. She was standing less than 1.5 feet from my face, and I couldn't back up, as I was in a corner. She began asking in a monotone and low voice all kinds of questions about him and how old he was. I answered vaguely and only gave as much info as I'd give any other stranger, his name and age. She then asked me again when he was born, and I said August. She then said, "I'm born in February. My mom in October, my dad in July, my brother in December." She listed another brother and some grandkids as well, but I was now frozen as those are the exact same birth months as my family, down to the family member. She continued to ask the same questions and tell me the same info over and over. At one point, looking at my son and then me, and says in a dull but creepy voice, I'm sorry. I just want to take him and go. I don't respond to this. At this point, I started to get my son's clothes wet because I'm in the bathing suit holding him freshly dressed, so I'm getting a little antsy and also freaked out. She looks at me and says in her monotone voice, slightly annoyed, "I'm bothering you, aren't I?" I start to say, "No, I just need to get dressed." And she cuts me off and begins to ask me about my son's eye color. I start to say that they're blue, and she again cuts me off and asks what color mine are. I then again start to say blue, and she reaches to my face and uses her fingers to open my eye. Then agrees they are blue and looks back at my son. She doesn't touch him, thankfully, but says, "They are blue. Just be happy they're not black," and gives this weird monotone laugh. All in all, she made me extremely uncomfortable. My son wasn't in danger, and I'm the most passive person in the world. I wasn't sure what to make of her at the time, so I remained as friendly as possible, but stopped adding anything to the conversation after she rattled off her family's birthdays that are the exact same as my family's. And honestly, at this point, I don't know what to make of any of this. So I came across an ad on Gumtree.au where you buy and sell stuff on this website in Australia where you can post anything from cars, jobs, and clothes. This ad stated that it was a pop-up nudist resort looking for staff, and it was $1,500 a day. It would supposedly be strictly a non-sensual bartending gig. The first red flag was that they were at capacity for male staff and only looking for female applicants. Naturally, I was curious. I messaged the guy asking about more information. He stated that it was strictly no touching and fully clothed, and that he would be hosting interviews at a hotel in the city if I would be interested. I asked for any additional information, i.e. a website or anything, and he stated that they don't advertise as he's affiliated with that community and has no website as they value their clients' privacy. Thankfully, I'm pretty switched on. It left a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach, so I reported it to the local police station and will be emailing them screenshots of the conversation. Here's a few copy-pastes of the most concerning parts. Me, just wondering if the interview will take place in the lobby. Is there a name of the company by any chance? Him, I don't, sorry. We have no websites as we don't advertise at all, as I'm affiliated with many in the community. I'll provide my ID in the lobby for you so you know you're safe. And that was on Monday, the 24th of January 2022 at 12:23 p.m. via Gumtree. Me, I'm very interested, but I'm quite unsure of the legitimacy due to the lack of advertising and no company name. Him, I never advertised, and my clients value their privacy. It's all good, we can talk in the lobby first and then proceed from there if you're happy. From then, I immediately called the local police station and sent in a form to the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, which is a trafficking site with details, as I truly am worried that this might just be a scam to kidnap and put people into human trafficking. This happened last night after a night of a lot of drinks. Names are generic because why not, but me, a 30-year-old male, my friend John, and our friend Jane, a 28-year-old female, were drinking at our other friend's bar. It's a small place and not too popular, so our friend behind the bar was quick to refill our drinks as we finished them. After last call, we decided to get food for our drunk munchies. There obviously weren't too many options, but we ended up going to a breakfast cafe in the bad part of town. Everything was fine. We paid and started walking out. On the way out the door, there was a shady-looking guy only wearing an open hoodie, no shirt under, and baggy worn-out jeans. He was leaning in a hallway for bathrooms by the exit and watched us leave, presumably noticeably drunk. As we're walking to the side of the building where our Lyft driver was picking us up, We noticed the sketchy-looking fella following about 10 to 15 feet behind us. We picked up our pace and got in the car and locked the door before even greeting the driver. Quickly said our names so he knew we were his riders and asked him to pull away because of the bad feeling. As we pulled out of the lot, I turned to watch the sketchball. I noticed that he had pulled a mask on, was wearing a single glove in his right hand, and I think he may have had a gun or a knife. The creep stood behind a bush, watching us leave. We called the restaurant to report it. Probably should have phoned the police too, but didn't really know if maybe we were overreacting. This happened around 2015 when I was working in a cute, fancy little boutique hotel. 6 substantial rooms and often had big name stays. I worked doing a bit of everything: guest assistance, reception, service in the restaurant, drinks, whatever was needed really. One of the line cooks was from Eastern Europe, was in about his mid-40s and worked full-time. He was always overly friendly with me to the point of making me feel uncomfortable, commenting on how I looked, staring too long, standing too close, touching me where opportunity arose. Just on the arms, back, and shoulder, but with a palm. Nothing overly outrageous, but there was a creepy feel about it. To give you a picture, I'm 5'2" and a really small build. This guy was tall, probably 6'5", and had a broad, strong build. He looked like he worked out. English was his second language, but he spoke it fluently. Often he would stand close to me or stand between me and the exit where opportunity presented and give me compliments, staring at my chest and saying, "Wow, you're good. Guys must love you. You're so beautiful. I love your legs in the uniform. You should always wear a skirt with those legs." Yada yada, etc., making me super queasy. He was also a born-again Christian and loved to recite random scriptures to me because he knew I grew up Catholic and figured for some reason I would appreciate it. I did let him know that I wasn't religious, and he volunteered that he was only recently becoming a born-again Christian. I asked him what made him turn to the Lord, quote-unquote, and I really wish I hadn't. His response? "It doesn't matter what you had done in the past, no matter what. When you become born again, you get a clean slate and forgiveness." He had the creepiest smile when he said this and was staring at me with his head lowered, almost like that Kubrick stare, if you know what I mean. It was full-on weird. This guy had done some messed up stuff. I have zero evidence of this other than he just gave off those vibes. Anyways, I went on a holiday for a few weeks, and on my first shift back, I'm setting up the restaurant for the evening dinner, and he shows up to work his shift. He comes up behind me with his mouth and nose against the edge of my neck. I could feel his warm, icky breath. He breathed me in, like smelled and inhaled me and said, I've missed your smell." Vom. It was disgusting. I just gave a weird, awkward smile and ushered away. I went down to the office to take a second to chill. My GM was in there at the time and he asked me what was up. I told him what happened, but said it wasn't a big deal, that I was fine and just wanted a second to chill. He didn't take lightly to it, went to the kitchen, and fired that idiot on the spot. He came back and told me that I'd have nothing more to worry about. And that was it. Never saw him again, and I did kind of fear him trying to get back at me or some crazy stuff like that, and that was a really good shift that night. It felt great to see my boss stick up for me like that. Thank God for good bosses. I've been through some scary experiences, but this is the worst thing I feel that I've ever gone through in my life. I used to be very naive, an innocent kind of person. I was the type of optimist who believed that there was a touch of goodness in every heart, a dangerous mindset to be in, truly. I realize now that seeing the world through my rose-colored glasses put a big flashing red target on my back. Often when you think of scary stories involving creepy behavior and psychological abuse, you think of an occurrence from a stranger. In my case, it came from my mother-in-law. My husband's mother-in-law initially adored me, not for reasons other than thinking that I could be easily controlled. I was meek with a passive personality, so it made sense that I could come across like someone who could be easily influenced. Looking back on it, I cringe at how creepy the situation really was. For the sake of the story, I'll call my mother-in-law by the name of Mrs. Psycho. At the beginning of my relationship with my husband, Mrs. Psycho and I were getting along great, or so I thought. She had taken me shopping, given me compliments about my hair and girly stuff like that. As the relationship with my partner grew more serious, she'd rant and rave to everyone in our neighborhood about how much she adored me and how I was like the daughter she never had. So, naturally, I thought things were progressing positively. But certain things were just really off about Mrs. Psycho. I noticed little tidbits of her behavior at parties and neighborhood social gatherings. She'd sulk in a corner, and I'd chalk it up as her being socially awkward or anxious, but looking back at it now, I noticed that she was always whimpering about something negative going on in her life. How she fell off her bike and hurt her elbow while riding through a construction zone. How one neighbor complained about her parking in front of his house, losing her job because she didn't get along with a coworker. The list went on and on. In every story, she portrayed herself as a victim of some unusual circumstances. One huge red flag that my mind didn't understand at the time was the story she was always telling about her other son, my partner's brother. She'd say some really disturbing things about how he'd held her, my partner, and his dad hostage in their home, and how he'd physically punched their father in the face. The way she described the story made it sound like my partner's brother was a bully to the whole family, and my partner didn't seem to think it was quite as severe as she made it sound. Regardless, in all her wild stories and accusations about him, she always scolded her son in ways that I just can't imagine ever scolding my own child. What my husband and I didn't fully interpret at the time was the underlying problem, which wasn't necessarily his brother, but the woman who had been the driving force for the insanity behind the behavior. Psychological abuse can trigger emotional responses in very unpredictable and disturbing ways. Mrs. Psycho's behavior became more evidently creepy after our engagement. She showed signs of unhealthy enmeshment. First, she was angry that we didn't tell her immediately when we got engaged. Then she was angry when we changed the wedding date without first asking for her permission. She expressed a desire for my future husband and I to live in the upstairs of her house and pay her rent. We told her that we can afford our own home and we want to start a family, so that wouldn't work out. The infuriation in her eyes was frightening. She would look normal one moment, then if you told her something she didn't want to hear, her eyes would turn black. The memory of her eyes still sends me with a frightening chill down my spine. And from there, she became increasingly controlling. Mrs. Psycho and her husband, Mr. Psycho, would start showing up to our house every other day or so. I started counting how long that they could go without having to see us, and that number came to 3 days. There was no privacy, and I felt that I had to close the curtains over our windows every night. I just had that uneasy feeling, you know. I locked the bedroom door as a routine before bed, just to be on the extra safe side. Despite our relationship being pleasant in the beginning, I noticed that I was now feeling like I was treading on eggshells around Mrs. Psycho, or rather, landmines. It seemed like anything I said was offensive to her, no matter how innocent. I realized I couldn't talk to her like I used to be able to when me and her son were just dating. I remember when we'd be able to have nice, in-depth conversations, and I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with her. I confided in her how I had a lot of social anxiety, and that her son came into my life during a time that I was suffering from crippling depression. I talked about how he'd brought a ray of sunshine in my life, thinking that speaking kindly about her son would please her, but she just had this unfeeling, glazed look across her face. Hoping to mend my relationship with her, I decided to help her out one day with organizing her antiques. She had this hobby of going to auctions and buying and selling knickknacks, buttons, and stuff like that. She would get very proud of her collections of things that I sort of thought were junk, but to be polite, I told her I saw beauty in these things, hoping to get back on her good side. There were some creepy dolls in the mix, including this horrifying-looking vampire doll with piercing red eyes. She said that she'd had that doll for years and used to scare her sons with it when they were little kids. She laughed at the memory, and the sound had an eerie, satanical vibe to it. As if this wasn't enough to freak me out, she then told me this story about how a female coworker complained about her to HR department at her company. To seek revenge on this woman, Mrs. Psycho wrote a letter that was meant for the coworker's husband, telling him that she was cheating on him. To remain as anonymous as possible, she told me how she slipped on a pair of black gloves and drove the letter to a faraway location so that her address couldn't be traced. I remember feeling very uneasy about her story, wondering how she could get angry enough to drive hours away just to cause emotional harm to another human being. There came a point after hearing this story when I didn't want to be left alone with my partner's mom anymore. My partner tried to talk to his parents about how I was feeling like I was on eggshells around them, but they flipped the narrative to say that they were the ones feeling on eggshells around me. During this time, I painstakingly realized that psychological torture exists in the form of extreme invalidation. Not having your feelings acknowledged can really drive a person crazy. It was then when I felt a little more clued into what may have happened to Mrs. Psycho's other son. I can't be sure because I never met the guy, but I think he was driven mad by his mother's severe emotional neglect. Now, she was pulling the same tricks on me and my partner, gaslighting us into believing that we were just too sensitive. When my husband and I started figuring out that something was off, things got even creepier. His parents started showing up to our house to corner us into submission. What I mean by this is they'd tell us stories to make them seem like victims so that we would give in to demands on what they wanted at that time. If we denied their requests, they'd use psychological manipulation by telling us that we were uncaring or ungrateful. One demonstration of this manipulation was when I became pregnant. I explained that the smell of pizza made me extremely sick, but this was ignored. When Mrs. Psycho insisted that we go to a pizza restaurant for her birthday, I was confused with why I felt that I couldn't say no. My husband was in the same predicament. Somehow I think we sensed that something bad would happen to us if we declined. This is also because Mrs. Psycho's husband and her sister had contacted us, telling us explicitly that we weren't allowed to say no to her dinner invitations anymore. They explained it like saying no hurts her feelings. But there was something else there that I can't quite explain. Something hidden beneath the surface that sounded almost threatening. I had no idea why, but I just didn't feel safe. Then, only 2 weeks after giving birth to our daughter, I had the creepiest interaction of my life. Mrs. Psycho caught me alone while on my front porch. The weather was really nice, so I was rocking with my baby in one of our outdoor chairs. She came up to the doorstep and assumed a seat in a chair next to me. Then, in a quiet, ominous voice, she said to me, "You have to share her, you know." Her black eyes flicked to the infant in my arms. I know what you might be thinking, but this wasn't said in a cute, excited new grandma kind of way. Her voice sounded cold and possessive with certain passive-aggressive intent behind the statement. I naturally clutched my arms around my daughter tighter, feeling a protective instinct to take over me. Mrs. Psycho had expressed to me before that she'd always wanted to have a daughter, but was only ever able to have sons. Maybe I was being influenced by the postpartum hormones or just overall feeling paranoid, but a disturbing thought occurred to me that she might want to get rid of me somehow to have my daughter to herself. I later told my husband about the bizarre interaction with his mom and how I couldn't keep up with the heavy psychological demands of his parents anymore. It was all taking a strange emotional toll on me, as well as a strain on our marriage, and I still couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Nevertheless, they were causing us a lot of stress, which was impacted on me all the more while I was trying to adapt to my new role as a mother. They even restricted me in bizarre ways, telling me I was not allowed to refer to our daughter as my baby. I had previously posted on Facebook how excited and happy I was to be a new mom. I posted a side-by-side picture of me with my daughter with the caption, "She has my eyes," which was meant to be lighthearted and innocent. My mother-in-law commented on the post with, "My son had something to do with it too, ... which not only put a damper on the mood, but also felt very creepy. Like, why did she have to mention something we already know? It was almost as if my happiness made her all the more enraged. I really felt like I was starting to go crazy. The stress was enough to make me physically sick. At first, my husband hesitated when I told him about my concerns, stating the usual spiel that was natural for him to say, that they were his parents and he couldn't just drop contact with them. But something in his voice contained fear, and it wouldn't take long before he would realize how messed up the situation actually was. The incident that drove him to the point of cutting off his parents happened when they cornered us in our own living room, demanding that we watch their unruly dog while they went on vacation for 5 days. My husband almost caved, but stayed firm when he told them, "No, we can't. We got a 2-month-old baby to look after." The murderous glare his mom then flashed at me was intense and enough to make me crawl out of my skin. You know that look that someone gives you before they're about to attack? It looked like something like that from the movies, very primal and hateful. I thought for sure that she was about to lunge at me and wring her hands around my neck, causing me death by strangulation. I was terrified. Mr. and Mrs. Psycho eventually left our house, but they were clearly angry that they weren't able to convince us to conform to their will. My husband and I had a dark, suspicious feeling that something bad was about to happen. First, we received lengthy emails from Mrs. Psycho, mostly insulting me. She said she thought that I was brainwashing her son, and she went on to portray herself as a victim. She used the knowledge of my anxiety disorder to make an argument that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. She threatened to post about me on Facebook and make our life terrible if we didn't apologize for deviating from what she wanted. At the same time, she told me that I was dead to her and listed all the mistakes I've ever made in the past as well as criticizing my faults. I'd be lying if I said this didn't sting. My husband and I needed space to recover from the emotional wounds that she had inflicted on us. We remained silent, not wanting to engage with her any further. My husband and I were pretty scared as well as being hurt, spending most of our days cooped up in our bedroom, not knowing what to expect. But we stayed strong through the process of separating from the toxic relationship. Mrs. Psycho proceeded to make good on her threat, posting about me publicly on Facebook. She said I was insane. She even went a step further, saying that I had borderline personality disorder in all capital letters. This came out of completely nowhere. She knew that I had anxiety, but I never mentioned anything to her about being borderline, because I wasn't diagnosed with that at all. And it didn't end there, though. An active smear campaign against me ensued as Mr. and Mrs. Psycho actually went door to door to everyone's house in my community, posing as good citizens to warn everyone about their extremely dangerous, manipulative, 5-foot-tall daughter-in-law. My neighbors didn't react the way that was expected, though. They were more wary of her than me. Instead of ruining my reputation, which was the desired effect, most people in my neighborhood were majorly creeped out by Mrs. Psycho's efforts. They were equally creeped out by Mr. Psycho's willingness to go along with the whole thing. I guess after years of being beaten down with his wife's abuse, he was just an empty shell of a man, a flying monkey to the proverbial wicked witch. There are a few doctors and therapists in my neighborhood who couldn't officially diagnose her since she wasn't their patient, but they said off the record that they believed Mrs. Psycho may have been projecting, meaning that she was, in essence, confessing that she is potentially dangerous and volatile while pinning it on me. This, along with some stories of Mrs. Psycho's interactions with other people in our neighborhood, confirmed that something was disturbingly off with this lady. This information made the situation all the more unsettling when Mr. and Mrs. Psycho showed up to our house for what we suspected would be a confrontation. My husband and I were watching Survivor in the living room with our baby when the doorbell rang. He crept to the front window to peer behind the curtain to see who it was. I could see fear on his face. "It's my parents," he said, and my blood ran cold. I immediately ran with the baby upstairs, pausing only to tell him that it was his choice whether to answer the door or not since they're his parents, but that me and the baby would be hidden away. As I made my way up the stairs, my husband hovered by the front door, conflicted. He didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, I could hear jostling at the front door like his parents were trying to force their way inside our house with a spare key. I thank God to this day that we had just changed the locks a few days before so they couldn't get in. I proceeded to run upstairs and close the bedroom door behind me, locking me and the baby inside. I held my daughter close, my heart thudding wildly against my chest. When there was a knock on the bedroom door, I reacted with a jolt. I was scared out of my mind. My husband's voice on the other side calmed me down, though. He told me that he didn't answer the door. He was trembling when I unlocked the door to let him in. His face was pale. He showed me a text message from his dad saying, "Anyone home?" Followed by another text from his mother later saying, "You're a coward, hiding behind your keyboard." I don't know what would have happened if my husband had chosen to answer the door, but I shudder to think about it. My husband and I both blocked them after. Phone numbers, social media accounts, everything. They moved away to another state, thank God. We have since been in no contact with his parents for almost 2 years now, and our daughter is growing in a loving environment free of that toxicity. Sadly, we had to block some of my husband's other family because they kept telling us that we should talk to my in-laws, which, by the way, feels a lot like being told, "Please contact your abuser." For this reason, I sometimes feel like it would have almost been better to be physically abused than mentally abused, because then there would be some form of visible evidence of the harm that they had inflicted. In the meantime, they have so far made no attempts to contact us with an apology or anything. Instead, they once reached out with a nasty, "Have a terrible anniversary. You two are the worst match for each other ever," which only further secured a decision to cut contact with them. I have since armed myself with knowledge so that I will be less naive about creepy behavior in the future. I've studied up on narcissism and the negative psychological impact that some people can have on others through gaslighting and invalidation. I hope everyone listening out there may be aware that not all abuse is physical. A few years back, when I was 17 years old, I went to a party. Everything was all right until the host started getting really intense and creepy. By that point, it was around 3 a.m. and I was pretty drunk. I decided to call an Uber in order to avoid any advances from the insistent guy. The Uber shows up and I try to sober up when I get in. The driver starts making small talk with me, and in the state I was in, I failed to see some of the red flags. He starts to ask me about the party that I was at, and I told him about the creep, and then he told me it was because I was short and cute. He then asked my age, and sensing a weird vibe from him, I told him I was a minor, thinking that that would deter any further advances, but it turns out that was a horrible idea. He was driving pretty recklessly on the highway, and I snapped out of my drunken stupor very quickly. He then asked me to go get drinks with him that same night and told me he really liked me. I quickly told him that I'd get grounded if I stayed out any later and that my mother was awake and waiting for me at home. Keep in mind, I live in Mexico, and the amount of people, and especially women, that get murdered daily is ridiculously high. When we got to my home address, I noticed the doors were locked, and he kept on insisting on us going to get a drink, even though by now it was almost 4 a.m. I tried to act as nice as possible when I told him I couldn't that night. He then asked for my phone number and told me that we could go out the next day. So, not being the first time that some creep had asked me for my number, I gave him my number but changed the last digits so he couldn't actually contact me. But then he actually dialed the phone as I was getting out of the car. Of course, my phone didn't ring, and he started getting agitated and said I gave him the wrong number. I played drunk and stupid and recited my number again, but actually said it correctly in order for him to think he heard the last number wrong. He chuckled and said it was his bad and told me that we'd see each other the next day. I made my way into my house and immediately woke my mom up because I was terrified. She managed to calm me down and told me to go to sleep, so I went into my bedroom and started putting my pajamas on when I heard my phone ringing. The Uber driver was trying to video call me, and I lost my mind when I saw that was on my screen. I immediately denied the call and then noticed that he sent me about 15 messages asking what time he could come pick me up and why I wasn't replying. Of course, I blocked him right away and thought that that would be the end of it. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number and checked the picture and saw that it was the driver. He asked me why I blocked him and started spamming me. I immediately blocked him again on that number. Over the course of the next month, I'd get messages from random phone numbers, and it quickly became obvious that it was the same driver. I would always block him, but eventually reported him on the Uber app and changed my number. The only problem is, he knows where I live.
This was something that happened to me when I was 11 years old, so 2003. I remember it very clearly because of how it affected me for weeks, and how I'd wake up at night thinking this individual was outside my window. I guess when you're a kid, things like this seem a lot more scarier than usual. But then again, if somebody is threatening you, it doesn't really matter the age. You're bound to feel some sort of emotion. On this Saturday morning, I was in my living room watching the newest episode of Pokemon on Kids WB with my cousin, who for this retelling we're going to refer to as Julia. Julia had been spending a few days over at my house as this was in the summertime, and naturally she's on summer break just like me. Taking care of us this morning was my grandmother, who had moved in with us just a few years earlier, in 1999. Now, as for my sister, my mom, and my dad, I remember clearly that morning that they had gone to the mall to take my sister shopping, along with one of her friends. So we're halfway through the episode, enjoying our bowl of Cocoa Pebbles and laughing at the shenanigans Ash, Pikachu, and company are getting themselves into, when the phone started to ring. Growing up, I never really answered the phone as that was usually left to either my mom or my dad, but as they weren't home, who was going to answer? My grandma could have answered the phone, but she never spoke English properly. Spanish was her main language. So after the phone did its normal ringing routine, stopped, and then rang again about 10 seconds later, I figured, what the heck, let's just see who it was, as I got up and made a short 5-second walk over to the phone. Hello? How can I help you this morning? I answered in my kind, respectful tone. Hey, open the door. I'm outside, a voice whispered to me. I took a few seconds to look over at my cousin and I asked her if she had heard anybody outside on the front porch. We do have a window that lets you see outside. However, it doesn't give you a great view of the front door. That's why she responds back to me and says she didn't see anyone. So I remove my hand from the phone, which I did so the person on the other end couldn't hear me, and I responded back by saying they might have the wrong number. It turned out that stating this was going to lead to quite the interesting, scratch that, threatening conversation. I want the drugs. Open the door, this individual stated, continuing with their whispering tone, but now mixed with a little bit of anger. Clearly, this guy has the wrong number. Well, immediately I hung up, only for the phone to ring again 10 seconds later. I know I shouldn't have answered, but I did just for the heck of it. Hello? Why did you hang up on me? Don't you care about your patients? At this moment, I started to get a feeling that I was dealing with somebody who might not be all there. After all, I remember the mentioning of drugs, medication, and them being a patient. My cousin Jamie can see the fright on my face, and she tells me I should just hang up the call. My grandma at this point has no idea what's going on, since we're speaking in English and she's in her room knitting a blanket, not really much to grab her attention. Again, I should have just hung up at this point, but for whatever reason, I decided to calm this person down. I don't know, I was just trying to be a good person. Hey, you got the wrong number. Seriously, I think you need to check your phone. Now, I'll never forget what he told me immediately after this. Even as I write this out to you all, it gives me a bit of chills. I'm going to kill you. Just you wait. I'm going to break in through the window, and I'm going to kill you. I froze at that moment. My cousin, who was standing next to me and listening in on the conversation, took the phone away from me and hung it up before I began to shake uncontrollably. It's not every day somebody threatens to kill you over the phone, especially when you're in the middle of watching Pokemon. Now, I wasn't sure if this person knew he was talking to a kid. After all, kind of strange for an adult to state those sort of things. But after I snapped out of it, I grabbed the phone yet again and I dialed 911. My main concern became that this was real and this crazy lunatic was really outside my house. At any rate, we got my grandma's attention and we ended up waiting about 5 or so minutes for the police to arrive since they're close to my house. We made sure to look through the window, fearing that we might have seen the crazed man staring back at us. However, thankfully it was a couple of police officers. What a relief that was. They did a complete search of the backyard, side of the house, and every little possible hiding spot, but they came back empty-handed. While that was a relief, I was still pretty paranoid and spooked by the random creepy phone call I received. The police reassured myself and my parents, who by now had arrived home, that they would do some extra patrols in the neighborhood, and if we saw any suspicious activity or received any more threatening calls, we were to let them know. Luckily, we never did get any more phone calls like that again. However, something interesting happened about a month later back at school. I was talking to some classmates about video games, and the conversation of being home alone popped up. I told my classmates about this strange call I had received, and one of them says they had a similar experience. Same idea of random stranger calling them about drugs, and how if they didn't open the door, they would come in and kill them. This classmate of mine, whose dad was in the garage working on his car, immediately went out to the front with his shotgun, only to find that nobody was there. Cops were called, and nothing. As I mentioned before, while nothing ever turned up with this random stranger, I think that's what makes this much more frightening, never truly getting a proper conclusion.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember to always do push-ups when Daddy's home. When I was 16 years old, my best friend and I made the dumb decision to get matching tattoos from an older man who was doing tattoos illegally out of his home. He was well known in the area within our age group for giving cheap tattoos to minors. He had recently gotten out of prison for giving minors tattoos and not practicing under state guidelines, and needless to say, I don't know what in God's name we were thinking, but hey, when you're a rebellious 16-year-old, not really caring and incredibly dumb, and you have the chance to get a tattoo for $20, I guess any and all common sense flies right out the window. So, we set up a time with him to go over to get our tats. I don't remember the exact time that we went over, but I remember it was already dark, so it must have been in the late evening or something. It was just the three of us alone in his house. I remember feeling very eerie being there. Something about him and the energy of the place felt very off. But being the dumb teen that I was, I chose to ignore those feelings and go through with it anyways. We were there for about 30 minutes. We got our tattoos and then left. Fast forward to a few months later, I see his picture and name on the news. At first I thought he got busted for his illegal tattooing, and little did I know that it was so much worse than that. He had been arrested for one of the most heinous crimes someone could commit. It turns out he bought an old police car, a cop costume, handcuffs, and would go into parts of Portland that prostitutes frequented, impersonating a cop to arrest them. He brought them back to his house and chained up the victims in his basement, his correction garage, where they wouldn't be heard. There, he would repeatedly assault them and torture them. I was absolutely sick to my stomach when I found out. I cannot imagine what these women went through, and I still don't really want to know all the details. This was all happening around the same time that we were at his house, so the chances that one of the victims were there around the same time as we were could have been a possibility. I thank God that nothing happened to us, but there's also a part of me that feels guilt. What if someone was screaming for help while we were there and we just couldn't hear them? Why didn't he kidnap us? We would have been the perfect targets. Every time I look at the tattoo, it's a horrible reminder of what could have been, so I'm planning on getting it covered up. Thankfully, all of his victims are alive, and I hope and pray that they are able to recover from this horrible act. He will be in prison for life with no possibility of parole. Always trust your gut. So about 2 years ago, I, a 16-year-old female, at the time I was 14, was home with my mom. It was just the two of us. Now, my mom at the time was addicted to drugs and alcohol and was in an essentially drug-induced coma. Nothing could really wake her up. I had decided to take a bath while she slept. My bathroom door was locked, as was my mother's bedroom door, as she seemed to think that we didn't know about her addictions and kept it locked so we didn't quote-unquote find out, and the house was silent. I had only been in the bath about half an hour before I heard my front door open. I assumed it was my eldest sister coming back from work, and as no one else would just walk in. But I wanted to be sure, so I texted her. Immediately, I got a worried text saying that, no, she wasn't home. Why? Was someone there? I froze. I could hear footsteps. Now, our house was small, one story, and from the front door to the bathroom door was only a small living room. I heard a weird scraping noise coming from the hallway to the bathroom. I heard the scraping stop outside of the bathroom door, and then someone grabbed the doorknob and kept turning it very slowly, side to side, for about a minute. The entire time I was silent, frozen still and shaking like a leaf. I wanted to call my mom and ask if it was her, but I didn't want whoever it was to hear the sound and to get to my mom. After a while, I didn't hear anything. I stayed in the bath for what I think was an hour until I heard the front door open and click shut softly. I still stayed in the bath, long after the water had gone cold, until I heard my sister come in and yell if I was here and if I was okay, and why the door was unlocked. I got out of the bath and heard her gasp before I had come out. But when I did, I swear my blood went cold. There was a line spanning the wall of the hallway. There, the paint had been cut like someone had trailed something sharp along the wall. Currently, the theory is that the scraping noise I heard was someone trailing a knife along the wall. I've had a few creepy things happen to me in my life, but this one I still think about how things could have went very wrong very fast. I'm a 20-year-old female. This takes place back when I used to live in southern Indiana, like seriously in the sticks. It was a weekend night and my best friend and I were coming home after our graveyard shift at a local waffle joint. She decided to get her dog from her house so we could stay at my place for the night. This is important for later. So we start heading out into the country where I live, and to get to my house there's a long narrow dirt road that you have to go down. About a mile or so in, we see a truck's headlights. We get closer and it's a nice truck, probably like a 2018 at least. I can't say that I know much about cars, leave me alone, but he's parked to where he's sideways, blocking the whole path. Now confused, I get out and ask if he's okay. He looked hopeful when he saw me at first. "I'm just waiting for a friend to come get me. My truck's stuck." He smiled at me and I noticed his pupils were nearly completely dilated. He looks back to my car and sees that I have someone with me, and he looks at the dog sticking his head out of the window. His smile fades and he says, "Pit bulls are mean and nasty." He quickly turns around and gets back in his truck. I go back to my friend and I'm like, "Put this thing into reverse and use whatever hood race skills that you have to get us out of here." So we take my poor 95 Caddy that really shouldn't be driving on a dirt road anyway, and back all the way down that road and get back to the main road. Relieved, we take a different road home. Then, lo and behold, the same guy is parked on that road standing off to the side smiling, just looking into our headlights. We were completely about to soil ourselves and we gunned it the rest of the way home. I don't know how he got there before us or what his intentions were, but I'm thankful that I wasn't alone, being my naive college girl self. So I was on the way home from Arby's with a mint chocolate shake, zoned out for a second and almost didn't notice his car. I tried just letting him through, but he insisted that I go on ahead. I didn't think much of it and just continued on walking. He drove on ahead and parked his car near some apartments. He had on a black polo shirt, so I assumed that he was just dropping something off for a job or something. As I kept walking, he approached me and offered me a $20 bill. I asked why, but couldn't understand what he said in response. I refused since I know what's best for me. However, that didn't deter him. He grabbed my waist and I stepped to the side. He then started pulling me towards his car. I bit his hand so he wouldn't silence me and made sure to scream as loud as possible to try and attract any bystanders if I could. He managed to get me into his car, and just before he could close it, I stuck my foot through the door to keep it open. I then got out and made myself go limp, since adding dead weight without warning creates sudden resistance and makes it harder for them to grasp you. Due to this quick thinking, I was able to get away unharmed. I quickly booked it and got on the phone with my mom once I was at a safe distance. I made sure to stay on the phone until I got back. After that, I'd taken some time to calm down and waited for the cops to get there to take my statement. The officer ended up praising my quick thinking, telling me that I'd luckily done everything right in the situation. Please guys, take self-defense seriously. I've only ever had a week-long course, and just that alone had managed to save my life. I didn't remember too much from my self-defense course and only used the basic techniques that I'd remembered, which was basically making noise, dropping my weight, and checking behind me. Any other actions I'd taken were a result of logic and quick thinking. Chances are, if I'd have gotten more self-defense training, it likely wouldn't have been as close of a call as it was. Also, never accept money from strangers. While there are good Samaritans out there, there's also people who don't have your best interests in mind. If you do think they have good intentions, make sure to double check by asking why they're offering you money. If you don't get a good legitimate reason, then make sure to refuse. If you refuse and they still persist, then get away immediately. For the weekend, I wanted to visit my boyfriend. He lives 2 hours away and I always go by train. I'm not easily spooked, but I always keep an eye out. A girl gotta do what a girl gotta do, am I right? 1 hour into the trip, it was around 8 p.m. then, and I see 2 men getting in the same train compartment as me. I was sitting in a 2-seat. The seat next to me was empty, and in front of me there was a seat for 4 people. So, 2 pairs of seats facing each other. The men came in being very loud, even though it was a silent compartment, but nobody said anything because they had already seemed very suspicious. From the moment they stepped into the train, probably before they got in, they had their eyes fixated on me. They stepped in through the door and sat in the seat in front of mine, the 4 seat, and from then on they kept an eye on me, while discussing things with each other in a language I didn't understand. Like every other girl, I get stared at frequently, especially when I wear my hair down. It normally makes me feeling a bit awkward, but I never feel unsafe when this happens. Until yesterday. But they were staring at me in every possible way. Through the chairs, standing up, sitting down, and bending over to get a good look. Through the reflection of the mirror and by getting up and walking past me. They were taking turns and walking over to the other compartment of the train. The other compartment was only separated from mine with a glass door. Every time one of them got up, they both started staring at me. Then one of them went away, and the other one had a clear vision of me, and they kept staring at me. He poked his head through the middle of the seats and offered me chocolate, which I politely refused. Then the other one came back, and 5 minutes later, the other man left, and They kept taking turns walking away, and every time one of them got up, the one who remained seated kept an eye on the other, and on me. Each time they were sitting across from each other, they discussed things, but I couldn't translate it. They kept looking at me and then started discussing again. When I had 20 minutes of my trip left, a lot of people got out at one stop, and then it was just me, them, and one other male then. The moment the doors were about to close, one of the creepy men started walking through the doors to check if there were people coming and going, and maybe to check if there was security, I don't know. I don't know why he did it, but when he came back, he scanned the train to see how many people were still on there, I think. And from that moment on, they both got in seats facing me. They would not stop staring at this point. As you can imagine, I panicked and was stressed out, so I slowly turned around to look behind the glass doors to see if there were more people there that could maybe help me. And to my luck, there were more people there. So I slowly and very softly put on my jacket. We still had about more than 10 minutes left, and I kid you not even 2 minutes later, one of the men starts getting undressed and changing. He took out his purse and jacket and kept looking at me and fixating on me while still discussing with the other man. And this is where I really started to panic. I already let my friends know what was going on, and my boyfriend was already at the train stop where I was supposed to get out. Then I contemplated what the smartest thing to do was, because there is an emergency number on the train that you can call or text if you feel unsafe, but I had a gut feeling that this would not help me. So I got my bags, got up and walked through the glass doors to the other compartment. I sat facing them so I could see what they were doing. They both got up and grabbed their bags and started walking towards me. Now mind you, they were sitting closest to the exit, so there was absolutely no reason for them to take this route too. I rapidly started to talk to someone on the seats next to mine and asked if he could help me, because I was getting followed and watched by these two grown men. He said that he also thought that they were very suspicious and was getting scared for me. He asked me to sit next to him so he could keep me a little safer and distract the men or something. Then he distracted me a little and asked me questions about my life. When the two creeps saw that I got seated next to that man, they were already coming my way and were making their way through the doors of the compartment. They were glass doors, so we could see each other very clearly. I had not shown any fear, but I was shaking so uncontrollably that they must have seen how scared I truly was. The moment they got through the door, they saw me getting seated next to the other man, and the creeps exchanged looks, looked at me, and discussed something, and then looked at me again, turned around and went the other way again. They were walking to the exit of the train, where, again, is a glass door, so we could still see each other. The whole time they were standing around the exit, they were looking at me with a very creepy and disturbed look on their faces. I can only describe it as, you got away, but you won't be so lucky next time. That's how it felt. The man that I was sitting next to also got that feeling and was trying to calm me down. He told me that he wasn't going to let me get off the train by myself and he would wait with me until my boyfriend arrived. But then our stop came and we walked to our side of the exit, and then came a realization. In the exit of the train, there were standing two other men with the same kind of looks as the two creeps. They talked the same language and they acted just as weird. These men were probably the men who the two creeps visited every few minutes. The men at the exit saw me, looked at me with a creepy look, but then the man who kept me safe made sure to them that he would walk with me, and immediately they seemed to look away. They also covered their faces with their hoods. The doors opened, and they nearly sprinted out, just as the other two creeps had hurriedly left. Then the man who escorted me out waited with me until we found my boyfriend, and then he went on with his day. We both could not thank him enough for keeping me safe. I thought that I lived in a very safe country in Europe, but I think that as long as you're a young woman on your own, you'll never be 100% safe while traveling and being abroad. I hate thinking about what would have happened if I was not helped by the man in the other compartment. I wish that I could have thanked him with gifts or a nice gesture, but I don't know his name and I'll probably never see him again. And to that man who saved me, I thank you with all my heart. This happened to me when I was 10. I'm female, dark brown hair, and tan, creamy skin, average height, just so you get the full picture. Now, considering my age and build, I would not have fought back particularly well had something happened at the time. At the time, I lived with my mom and younger brother, who must have been about 7 or 8. We all lived in a pretty secure area of town, and what's more, our apartment had a security guard. To get in the lobby, he had to buzz you in unless you had your own key card. The elevator was activated by keycard too, so either you had your own or the security guard would have to key you in. Also, a small screen inside our apartment with a button to call security if you needed. This made us feel safe to some extent, but my mom is a cautious person and is always very aware. We were moving and we sold a lot of stuff, including our TV, a normal-sized flat-screen thing. We couldn't take everything with us, so this had to go. Eventually, a man in mid-30s or 40s got in touch with expressing interest in our TV. He said that he'd drop by our apartment the same day, and he did, but a little later than expected, as it was around 7 p.m. He does all the usual checks to see if it works properly, and eventually starts asking my mom about where my dad is. He lived abroad at the time, and then asked me questions like, where's my school and how old am I? Being a naturally friendly person, I answered and ended up telling him all about our field trip that I took with my class to a beach. He then asked if he can connect his phone to our TV to project images of the beach. He'd apparently been there before. My mom reluctantly agrees, and he does so. In those pictures, there's a pretty young woman. He says he's a photographer and would I like to model for him sometime. And this is the point my mom pulls me closer to her, frowning, and politely declines. I don't suspect anything, and I am in fact excited and keep asking my mother to please let me model. She tells me to be quiet and doesn't sound happy at all. He continues to talk about his photography and said that I would make a good model. All the while, I kept getting more eager and nagging my mom to let me do it. I had no idea of his intentions and was completely okay with the idea. I also noticed the woman on the photo was wearing a skimpy bikini thing, and since I really wanted to be grown up, you all remember what that felt like, I asked if I could wear one too. He said yes. My mom, I could tell, was completely freaked by this point. I suspected nothing, of course, and with childlike innocence, I asked him if I would get money, and again he said yes and kept encouraging me to pose for him. Looking back now, I feel terrible for my mom, who knew exactly what was going on but couldn't stop me. On top of all that, he told me repeatedly how good a model I was while I giggled through pose after pose, tossing my hair, arms up above my head or hand on my hip. Really, really creepy looking back on it. He's been there for over an hour now. He says he's calling his friend to ask if he can buy the TV. Why would he do that? Who knows? He speaks with him for a bit and then says that he needs to call his wife this time, and again we let him. When he hangs up, my mom asks if he wants the TV again. He tries to start a random conversation to distract her, but it's really late and we're getting tired. My mom calmly explains that it's late now and her kids, my brother and I, are tired and need to shower and go to sleep, at which point the guy says, "Oh, that's fine. They can do that, I don't mind," then encourages us to go wash. Even I was creeped out by this point. My mom again told him to come back another day. He got angry, insisting that he stay because he wanted to check this or that feature on the TV. My mom stood her ground, but I could tell that she was scared, alone with this creep and 2 young children to boot. After a long argument, she turned to me, telling me to go to my room with my brother. Needless to say, I didn't argue. We went into my room and shut the door behind us. I heard the front door open and my mom telling him to leave or she'd call security. He again tried to stay, but she wasn't having any of it and said something along the lines of, "Yeah, no, get out of my apartment now, or I am calling the cops." He finally left, and my mom put us to bed. She probably didn't sleep at all that night, and we thought that would be the end of it. The next day he came back, under the same pretext as before, but by now it was clear that he had absolutely no interest in the TV, just in us. Security, knowing what had happened prior to that day, immediately called my mom to know if it was okay to let him through or not. I asked if it was the photographer guy again. My mom nodding before motioning for me to be quiet, then told security that they weren't to let him in, thanked them for calling her first, and that was the end of it. Apparently he got aggressive with security when they tried to show him out. I don't know if he tried anything after that, but I'll ask my mom and post an update if I learn anything. There is something innately wrong about a man who comes into a young mother's apartment, tries to recruit her kid for bikini pics or worse, and refuses to leave. It's sinister and creepy, and I don't like to think what could have happened. In 2014, I finally decided that it would be my last year working on the high seas. It paid very well, but there's a reason for that. It's extremely hard being in the middle of the ocean for 3 months at a time on a non-luxurious 50-foot freezer boat. Living on the ocean is a constant reminder humans aren't meant to be there. From the stench of rotting fish bait, mixed with diesel, to the constant motion of swells under your feet, combined with the vastness of nothing, I always compared it to being an astronaut. It tends to drive you up the wall eventually, no matter how fortified you are. For context, just being able to sit on a non-moving furniture back at home was an ethereal experience. The last day of the season tends to be the longest, as we have to pick up every long line that was in rotation and detail the deck of the mess left behind. This would take us very late into the night. On this particular night, we ended our day at around 1:30 a.m. We were 17 hours away from land, so our captain decided to take a nap and allow us 2 hours of rest before we took our wheel shifts, yet not standard practice, as he was an alcoholic. We were so far offshore, our captain put us on a slow autopilot, which essentially would just keep us from not drifting further from land as everyone took power naps. My little ritual every night was to make some tea and smoke cigarettes by myself on the deck. It was the only time I got to myself in such small quarters. This night, however, was both the last night of the season and of my career on the ocean. Although I was relieved, I felt a weird bittersweetness knowing that I'll never be this far out in the Pacific Ocean again. I climbed to the top of the cabin where I had secretly stashed a joint in the outdoor freezer. It was sort of my little secret treat at the end of the seasons. I sparked it up and stared out into the moonlit ocean. I went into deep thought for quite some time. As I climbed back down, my jacket got snagged on a fishing hook, which was from a fishing rod stored behind the ladder. And this is when my 19-year-old brain concluded I should do something out here that I will never be able to get to do again. And that was, well, letting all of the fishing line out on a 200-pound test rod into the near infinite depth of the ocean just to see what would happen, I guess. I wasn't all that concerned at the time, as I've seen essentially 99% of the fish that lived out here, but I've yet to see certain deep-sea oddities such as anglerfish and such. My fascination took a hold of me. I proceeded to clamp on a bigger, heavier halibut lure onto the fishing line's carabiner, which wasn't designed for rods, but I felt it was heavy enough to sink further down. I began to let all the line out at the A-beam port of the vessel. Standing there for what seemed like an eternity, I began to give up on actually letting it all out. At this point, it was a little past 2 a.m. My day's work was starting to become more apparent to me. I started reeling it in quite quickly as I lost interest in this whole idea. I just wanted to sleep at this point. When suddenly, my rod got hooked on an immense dead weight. Extremely dead weight. It wasn't like a fish. I knew what those felt like. I instantly realized that I got snagged onto a kelp patch on my way up. I just wanted to get this done and over with. As I got the kelp patch closer to the boat, I peered over the railing and noticed that the water was absurdly black even for dimly lit night conditions, almost Vanta black. I tugged on my rod trying to assess where the kelp was when I saw a tea saucer-sized silver light flashing in the water. Honestly went lightheaded not knowing what I was looking at. I started hearing something reminiscent to hot tube jets spewing out of water, except much louder. The louder it got, the blacker the water became. At this point, I was just confused until I see an arm roll up to the side of the boat. As the water cleared from the inky blackness, I saw an 8-foot-long, cigar-shaped creature. It was a squid. Out of everything I've caught in these waters, this was by far the most unexpected, as squid don't tend to make their way up this far north. I remembered hearing about an instance a few years back when they got stuck in an ocean current which pulled them further up than usual. My mind instantly went to, how can I get this thing on the deck? The bragging rights that I would have amongst the crew on our entire trip back would be a poetic end of my career. I began to look for a gaff hook, one arm on the rod, one arm pushing totes around on the deck, frantically looking. I kept a lot of tension on the rod just to ensure that it was still there, but I started to notice my rod was bending very aggressively, nearly pulling the tip of the underside of the boat. The power of this thing felt almost like a hydraulic winch. No gaff hooks in sight. They must have been placed in a storage compartment as we were going to be docked in the next 24 hours. It was standard practice so they wouldn't get stolen in the harbor. I rushed back to the railing, peering over the side. The squid has seemingly vanished out of sight, but the immense tension was still there, and I haven't let any line out. Until I noticed the unfortunate situation. The squid has latched itself on the bottom of the boat like a tree trunk. I put both of my feet on the railing, nearly pulling my back to the deck. I felt a huge release, almost like a giant Velcro strap being pulled apart. I nearly fell on my butt. I lunged towards the railing again, trying to shorten the line even more to inch this thing from out underneath. But my skinny teenager arms buckled almost instantaneously, as I could see this thing rolling its whole body and arms back to the bottom of the boat. My anchored foot slipped on a coil of loose rope on the ground, nearly throwing me off the deck. My gut hit the railing. Face to the water, its huge head with its large silver saucer eyes peered out for a moment. They were darting around in a controlled frenzy, almost like it was analyzing me. I neutralized myself and put my feet on better grounding. I began to accept. The risk here might be higher than the reward. Accepting my strength and its immense power, I began to contemplate cutting the line. I noticed the three-pronged hook was attached to the base of its tentacle. In an optimistic attempt, I pulled the rod tightly. The tip starts to bounce and flick. The squid began to contort and twist its whole body, pulling its tentacles close to itself, wrapping one tentacle around its hooked arm. Knowing it had compromised its grip on the bottom of the boat, I pulled once again, until suddenly, the rod snapped straight. There is a cleanly cut, amputated squid arm on my hook. This thing performed surgery on itself. The whole length of the squid slowly pulls forward from out under the boat, and I swear, stares at me for a moment, and with one graceful contraction of its arm and a jet stream of ink, it disappears into the depths. I stood there for a moment waiting for my heart rate to hit baseline. I placed the rod on the deck with the squid tentacle still attached and just stared at it. The tentacle slowly coiled itself around the fishing pole. I picked up my teacup off the ground, and I walked into the galley. I threw the remainder of yesterday's cold coffee into my cup, head my way to the captain's stateroom, and knocked on the door. No reply. I opened it a crack and said I'm ready for my wheel shift. The captain, in a drunken mutter, asked, "Have you rested?" And I replied, "It's time to head back." A few months ago, my girlfriend and I were on the drive back home from a late-night concert at about 1 a.m. We were basically in the middle of nowhere, and I decided to pull off at a random rest stop to use the bathroom. I figured at this time the only people at this place would be just truckers and other people in the same situation as me. I got out of my car and walked up to the building, and as soon as I stepped inside, there were a few weird things that I noticed. So this place was laid out with 2 men's rooms and 2 women's rooms and 2 vending machines, one in both corners on either sides of the restroom doors. When I walked in, there were 2 people, both of them standing directly in front of each vending machine, both just staring at the vending machines, not reaching to get money or actually intending on buying something. So I walked past these people and went into the first men's room. I walked inside and I was the only person in this room, using the urinals, which were laid out in a U-shape. A few seconds later, someone else walks in, an older guy, maybe like 50 to 60, working class looking guy, and he walked over and started using the urinal right behind me, a few feet away. Nothing about this was very alarming at first, but being the careful person that I am, I already have my pocket knife open in my hand in my front hoodie pocket. Once I finish up, I go to wash my hands and walking out the door to the first restroom. As I walk out, I realize that I also had to go number 2. So to avoid being awkward, I walked into the second men's room, taking note that these weird vending machine people were in the exact same spot. I go into the first stall and try to go about my business when I hear someone else walk into the restroom and go into the stall right beside me. Keep in mind there were about 6 other open stalls away from me. I thought this was really weird, so I looked down and immediately recognized the work boots as the guy from the first bathroom. This guy just walked in and I wasn't even in there for 2 minutes. I immediately got up and left that bathroom. I started speed walking out of the building and I noticed from outside, looking back inside, that he also had quickly got up and was heading towards the outside doors. I just hopped in my car, waking up my girlfriend, and I told her that I would explain in a minute. I put my car into reverse and just whipped out of the spot. As I was shifting into drive, I looked up and saw this guy a few feet away, standing next to this old beat-down truck, literally staring me down as I started to drive away. I stared directly back at him and saw him make this really creepy mime-like surprised look at me. I was really tired and confused, but still don't know what this guy was planning at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere at 1 a.m., or if the vending machine people had anything to do with it at all, but this is one of the only times I've ever experienced something like this and have felt in actual danger. If anyone has any similar experiences or ideas of what this may have been, I'm all ears. I want to start this by saying that I know people can be friendly and I don't automatically assume that they're creeps. I picked my girl up from school with my 2 nearly 3-year-old boy. I decided to take a different route home through the park so they could go to the playground. As we were walking, there was a guy, around 55-ish, walking towards us with a tiny Pomeranian dog. My kids were in awe of this little teddy bear. The man smiled but didn't interact and we passed. A minute later, as we were walking, I turned and noticed that he had gone back on himself and was now following us. This obviously got my attention and I felt a bit strange. He picked up pace and walked alongside us and asked if the children wanted to pet his dog. I was polite and encouraged the kids to stroke the dog. Then we moved on and I kept saying, "Okay kids, let's go to the swings." And 2 minutes later, he came toward us at a different route, again asking my children to pet his dog. My guard was up here and I got us away as soon as possible. Now 10 minutes later, we're in the enclosed playground. Now bear in mind, there are signs everywhere around this area to state that it's a no-dog zone. This guy just appears again, walking his cute dog 5 feet away from us, trying to get the kids' attention. It worked and they were calling for the dog and he tried to linger. I had to politely ask him to move on and he looked to be so angry with me. He went and that was it. My senses were just searing at me and I had to voice this somewhere. Was he weird or just some type of nice guy? Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. I was a recent college grad and dating a guy who had matriculated in my same class. He moved out to the suburbs soon after graduation for a new big boy job. I stayed in the city and lived in an apartment with a roommate, but being young and in love, I would often schlep 30 or so minutes in irritating traffic to hang and inevitably spend the night. Looking back, he rarely came to visit me, which was the sort of vibe that led me to eventually break things off. Anyway, boyfriend lived in a duplex in one of those labyrinth cookie-cutter subdivisions and shared it with 2 other people. These were virtual strangers that he had found through Craigslist. There was one roommate who was so chill that I don't remember him or her at all. This was also 10 plus years ago. And then there was the roommate that made me uneasy and whose creepy face I can unfortunately conjure up clear as a bell even now. And we'll call him Rob. Rob looked like an average, slightly leathery, nebulously 40-something surfer. I remember that he would always be in a t-shirt with some skater and extreme sports logo and flip-flops. He had a bit of a belly and talked in a slow, aloof way that seemed to have a smattering of condescension, no matter what the subject was. Definitely a one-upper personality. The thing I can picture most about Rob was his shaggy dark brown hair and eyebrows so big that they hooded his eyes and gave him a raccoon-like quality. Underneath the eyebrows were distant, empty eyes, droopy like a hound dog. When he would make eye contact, which was almost never, there was something there, or maybe something missing rather, and I just didn't like the way that it felt. Now, something to know about me. I was pretty easy to get along with in those days. I still am affable, but I was akin to a polite Labrador back then. I was enthusiastic and full of joy. I'm not sure if that bubbliness got under Rob's skin or what, or if he was just a sadist. I was always nice to him and as considerate as I could be in their house, but regardless, there were two occurrences that left me chilled and thinking, what did I do to this person? The answer being, nothing. Someone had the idea one night to go bowling. We piled into Rob's VW van and took off for the bowling alley. The route there was on windy country roads and it was a dark stretch of highway. My boyfriend and I are sitting in the middle row, so far back but not by a huge stretch. All of a sudden, I felt the van getting faster and faster. If I had to guess, I would say that it was going 65 to 70 miles an hour. I hate reckless speeding and I'm a bit of a baby, but I tried to keep it cool. However, when he jerked the car around a sharp curve, I gasped and heard him laughing, seemingly at me. "Hey, would you just slow down? You're kind of freaking me out," I said, loudly over the thumping stereo. My tone was still friendly, but serious and obviously nervous. He turned up the volume on the radio and accelerated the van. My heart was slamming and I was really scared. I got the impression that he was going faster because I was scared. I yelled at my boyfriend to make him slow down because he was the one who lived with this maniac. My boyfriend yelled a few times, half-heartedly, and I could tell that he was embarrassed by the fear. He drove a sports car at Mach speeds and loved racing. Finally, after I cried out please a few more times, my head in my lap, he slowed down, but not without making eye contact with me in the rearview mirror once I brought my head up. All I could see were his eyes, and I couldn't tell if he was glaring or smiling. Either way, it was very chilling. The other incident was a few weeks or months later. Boyfriend and I were coming back from something or other and went to his place after. We entered through the sliding glass door that leads into the living room and soon discovered Rob was throwing a party. There were about 20 people milling about the connected living room and kitchen, staring at us in their unfriendly hipster way as we made our way to the boyfriend's bedroom. Suddenly, one of Rob's party guests, who by the way was built like a refrigerator, decides to roid out and throw a heavy wooden chair. He threw it in the style someone might launch a shot put, with a little whirl and a yar type yell as he whirled it across the room. I really think the guy was just being a drunken idiot and didn't intend for it to happen, but the chair sailed across the room and right into my left upper thigh, hard. I kind of yelped with pain and surprised and crumpled to the carpet, my hands over my thigh. If not for the blaring music, it would have been silent as no one said anything. Even the guy who threw the chair just stood there with an unfixed gaze like he was trying to see what or who he hit. And then I looked at my boyfriend's roommate. He was smiling, and this time I could see his mouth, and he was smiling. It wasn't a maniacal Cheshire cat smile, but a smug, satisfied smirk, mixed with utter contempt. I remember that his nostrils even flared as if this was an unexpected rush of dopamine pleasure through his body. He enjoyed both scaring me and seeing me hurt. Finally, after much too long, my milquetoast of a boyfriend whimpered, "Are you okay?" To which I said, "No, help me up," admittedly a little testy. My eyes were watering with humiliation at the situation, the bone-deep radiating pain, everyone just staring at me, and this man I barely knew feasting his eyes on my distress. I got out of that relationship not long after and felt so relieved to never have to go back to that toxic vortex again. Working as a waitress, people often treat you badly. For every 25% tipper, there's 10 old guys who leer and tip 10%. I usually made it through my shifts okay, but one customer interaction truly creeped me out. It was a slow night, and this older couple got seated in my section. The wife seemed spacey, but nothing too weird. When I came back to their table to get drink orders, she was slowly rearranging the sad little fake flowers that we had for decoration. I joked about it, some line about her messing with my arrangement. She looked up at me, wide-eyed. I'm a florist's daughter. She was still moving them around and looking at me after I left with her drink orders. I came back with her drinks, and she's done playing florist, and I ask what they want to order, and while the husband is speaking, she interrupts him repeatedly to order a soup. Same tone each time, no indication that she even hears him speaking. I ask her if she wants it served first as an appetizer. She stares at me, repeats the same sentence. The husband cuts in and confirms that they want it as an appetizer. I leave to put in their orders. Later, I stop by and ask how the food is. The wife grabs my sleeve, right at the elbow, and pulls me towards their table. She compliments the food, but at this point, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. Her grip is pretty strong, too, so I have to repeatedly tug my sleeve to get away. Finally, they're done with their meals, and I ask how everything was while clearing their plates. The wife is very pleased and is still staring at me, wide-eyed and blank. Then she says, "I never got your name." I usually don't tell customers my name unless they ask, so I tell her. She stares at me, unblinking, and then asks, "Do you know what it means?" My name is very common, so it's a weird question. I say it's biblical or something. She still stares, and then she says, "It means beloved by God. That was my daughter's name." She's grabbing my sleeve again. I know she was beloved by God because He took her back so soon. She's still staring at me in her weird, wide-eyed way, then she smiles. The husband is quiet, unbothered, and I kind of stutter and just get out of there. Maybe she was still grieving or on something like a heavy-duty mood stabilizer or something. She had at least one glass of wine, but I was really convinced that I was going to drop dead after that conversation. It was just so ominous. I didn't feel physically threatened, sure, but it was the creepiest conversation that I've had with a stranger. I joined a Facebook group where people would post ads for butchering equipment. I had this old meat slicer that was no longer in use. As I was getting ready for work one morning, I got a message. It was around 6:20, but that didn't seem to bother this very passionate potential buyer. He asked a few questions about the meat slicer and seemed a bit frantic, like his life depended on that machine. He requested a video call a few times to make sure that the machine was working properly, which I rejected as I was getting ready for work. Then he found another ad that I had posted, an old typewriter. Apparently he was interested in that too. Asked me about the price, if it was functional, etc., just some pretty standard questions. We had texted for around 20 minutes when he asked if he could call me to really seal the deal. I gave him my number, to which he said, "I can't call you. We're not in the same network. Can I call you on Facebook Messenger instead?" So he did. I picked up and asked if he could hear me. There was no response. I looked at the screen and, well, let's just say that I find it impressive that someone managed to participate in a semi-normal 20-minute conversation about buying butchering equipment and a typewriter at 6:40 a.m. while touching themselves. Last week, a man approached me on my way out of work. I work in a big facility, so it's not strange that I don't know him. He started by complimenting me, but in a way that made me feel really uncomfortable. He was telling me things like how good I smell and I'm so beautiful that he watches me all the time. He said he wishes that he could see me more often and wants to get to know me, to which I replied that I have a boyfriend and I'm not interested. He laughed at me and said that my boyfriend doesn't have to know and that he wants to take me for dinner. He then asked for my number and he followed me right to my car by this point. There was no one else around and I was starting to feel scared as I've got some trauma centered around men and telling them no. I just wanted him to go away, so I unfortunately gave him the number. I didn't give a fake because he'd handed me the phone on the screen that you would type a number you're about to call, so I was scared that he might test that. I had a panic attack in my car before I went home and hoped that that would be the end of it, and I blocked the number. All weekend he didn't text, but I did get called by that same number 3 times. I don't know if it was his, as he didn't give it to me. When I walked into work this morning, he appeared out of nowhere and started talking to me like we have this secret relationship or something. I don't know how he found out what time I started because I'd never seen him when I come in before. I don't think I can report it to HR because I'm stupid and I haven't been able to actually tell him he's making me uncomfortable. I don't know if this will persist, but I'm scared to leave work right now. Any advice would be incredibly appreciated. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night, and I'd love to see you there. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and remember to schlep your schmeat. This happened to my younger sister and gave me goosebumps when she told me about it. I've tried to get across the story in the manner in which she recounted it to me. In our town, the bus station is a gray little lot next to a small shopping center. It is basically 12 bus bays under a concrete roof, and because our council has no money, it's a bit of a dump. There are lights, but they don't all work, and there are very rarely any other workers there. So picture the scene. A 16-year-old girl enters the bus station in the evening after meeting with friends who have all gone their separate ways. There are no buses in the station, it's dark and the lights are flickering. As she makes her way across to the empty bus bay, she notices that she is not completely alone. Set across the terminal from her, occasionally illuminated by the broken lights and staring right at her, is a shabby old man wearing a long coat. As she takes her seat, he stands up and starts shuffling towards her. At this point, it is another 10 minutes until her bus is due. Her heart sinks and she goes into defensive mode. He draws closer and sits down on the bench next to her. "Are you getting a bus to Blankton? Is that where you live?" he asks. He stinks. The smell of him, body odor, and filth is so strong that she can almost hear it. She can feel the smell of him radiating off, almost buzzing. It makes her ears itch and her skin crawl. He has a few rotting teeth, a scraggly matted beard, and a stained bandage around his middle. He is clutching a plastic bag, which also smells horrible. Edging across the bench, she has no idea how to respond. "Yes, I'm waiting for the bus," she says, trying to remain polite, hoping that the bus turns up early. She cranes her head looking around, looking for a bus driver, a security guard, anyone. All she can see is the flickering lights. "I think I'll wait with you," he says. His plastic bag is swinging back and forth, and each time the top opens, a flash of a disgusting, wet smell comes from inside. A bus pulls into the bay he had originally been sat at, and she points to it desperately. Isn't that your bus, sir?" "Oh, no," he replies, grinning. "I'm just waiting." She reaches into her bag and pulls out her phone. I just remembered something," she says. She decides to call her mother to come and pick her up. She will wait in the safety of a cafe nearby. She can't spend another second next to this creepy man. As she stands up, she gets a glimpse of the contents of the plastic bag. The bottom of her stomach feels as though it has fallen away and her fingers go numb. She turns on her heels and runs to the cafe without any further pretense of politeness. Though she can hear him calling after her, she doesn't hear what he says. "It was a dead cat," she told me later. "He was sitting there holding a bloodied, dead cat." I never go to that bus station alone anymore. I almost forgot about this encounter, to be honest. It's been years, and my boyfriend was talking about that part of Melbourne, Springvale, which has a heavy Chinese population. I used to live there, and as a hobby I was learning some Mandarin due to an interest in it. Understand, I only had a rudimentary understanding of it at the time. I was living in share house at the time and was traveling to my hometown down in Warrnambool for my birthday. I take the train down, get presents, and spend time with my family. But the real story was when I traveled back to Melbourne. I got back rather late. It was the latest train to Melbourne, and I was sure I would get home from there. My travel plans were to get off at Springvale and take a bus home from there. I didn't check the travel arrangements and cancellations. My parents had no net and my phone had none as well, so I was not aware of any bus problems. I got off at Springvale quite late, between 10 and 11 p.m., and went to the bus station nearby on the street. I noticed one guy was at the station already on his phone, but paid him no mind. While I waited, I heard him speaking Mandarin, and as I was a noob at that language, I tried to translate in my head. I was terrible at it. All I could understand was girl, 16, and hair. I was confused at the 16. Was he talking about my age, or even talking about me? I have been mistaken for younger than my 20-something years at the time. I look much younger, being petite. He's still there at the bus stop with me when 3 men walk up. He's talking to them in Mandarin. I'm waiting for the bus, and I catch some of what they're talking about. What do you want, young? Take her. I'm freaking out. It's late and I'm here with people who are acting insane. At this point, a bus comes by, but not even to my area, but I flag it down and get on board, still shaking. The bus driver was concerned about me and had the decency to ask where I was going, and as his last customer, he actually drove me to my stop, and the bus was completely empty. I have no idea what those men were planning to do, and thank God that bus had come by just in time. Since then, I've actually given up on trying to learn Mandarin altogether. I'm a 16-year-old male in the UK who catches the bus daily to school from the bus station. There was one guy, an Indian with an accent in his late 20s, who I'd often see at the bus station, and he'd catch the same bus as me, but he kept to himself. One day I was standing at the bus station on my phone when I noticed him staring at me out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was a bit weird, but just ignored it. He kept on staring at me, so I turned and looked at him. The guy then started smiling, and suddenly did that thing where you pretend to go for someone's balls, which is funny if it's your friend, not a random dude. I was so surprised by this that I didn't even react, and after doing the fake ball grab, the dude started chuckling. By this time I was quite weirded out. He then asked me random questions like if I knew him and stuff like that, and kept touching me on the back. The bus arrived while his hand was still on my back, and he walked onto the bus with me. This is where I began to doubt his mental health. Before I even got a chance to show my pass to the driver, the guy said to the driver, "He is the Mafia Don. He doesn't need to show the pass," and tried to usher me along to sit down. I was obviously embarrassed and quickly paid the annoyed driver while making it perfectly clear that I didn't know who this man was. I grabbed a single seat and ignored his calls, inviting me to sit next to him by making up some excuse that I was waiting for a friend. After a while, one of my friends came on and I quickly went to sit next to him whilst keeping an eye on that weirdo. Finally, the guy's stop came. Whilst waiting for the bus to stop, he grabbed a phone out of a random 12-year-old's hands and started pressing random buttons. After the kid snatched it back, he chuckled and touched the kid's cheek and hair. The bus finally stopped and the guy got off, still chuckling to himself. I still don't know what was wrong with that guy, and I have yet to see him on the bus again. This happened to me a few days ago. I don't usually catch the bus home from work, but my car broke down and I had no choice. It was about 6 p.m. and I was sitting, reading, and minding my own business in a quiet corner of the bus station when a man came over and sat next to me. This wouldn't necessarily have been odd, but I was on the end chair in a row of 5 seats and had my arm across the chair next to mine. I had to move my arm as he sat down. He was perhaps mid-50s with baggy, scruffy clothes on. He smelled very badly of sweat, and after a few seconds it started to make me feel sick. Then he started rubbing his hands together and mumbling to himself, "Yes, yes, yes." At this point, I got up, making out that I was checking bus times, and turned the corner of the bus station to sit in a busier area. I sat on a bench facing my bus stop and settled down to my book once again. About 5 minutes later, I could see out of the corner of my eye that someone was coming over to me. I shuffled in my seat, and lo and behold, it was the man again. He once again sat right next to me, and this time he was uncomfortably close. He was twitching and still mumbling, "Yes, yes," and the mumbling was getting louder. The bus was late now, and I started to get freaked out. There were people around, but nothing had actually happened, so I couldn't ask for help. After a few seconds, I got up to join the queue that had started forming for my bus. The man didn't follow me, although I looked over once and I could see him looking at me. The bus pulled up, and still the man didn't move. I began to breathe a sigh of relief as I turned to board the bus, safely sandwiched between 2 other people. As I had my foot on the step of the bus, I heard a scuffle behind me. I turned, and the man had pushed into the queue to be directly behind me. My heart started to beat faster, and I began to think that he was actually trying to follow me. I knew if I chose a seat by myself, he would sit right next to me, so I sat next to a woman right at the front of the bus. The man sat directly behind me, and I could hear his breathing and his murmuring. I could still smell the sweat. I still needed to catch another bus when I got off of this one, and my plan was just to run as fast as I could across town to the other bus stop, hoping he wouldn't follow, or at least wouldn't catch up. Luckily, I managed to run and get on the other bus just as it was pulling off. As I sat in my seat, I looked out the window to see the old man staring at me, breathing heavily as if though he was running after me. I could see his mouth mumbling to himself as he stared with dead eyes. I'm so thankful I got out of there and didn't find out what his intentions were. I had a friend that introduced me to a guy she knew on the internet, and I started instant messaging with him because she said he was a friend of a relative. A lot of my friends were talking with him at the time, and me and the friend even video chatted with him once. I had a computer in my room at this time, so I talked to him a lot more than my parents realized at the time. Well, the IMing sessions slowly got more sexual. He had convinced me that I shouldn't stay at my home and that I should run away. He also convinced me to break up with my boyfriend at the time. This guy had my stupid 16-year-old self completely brainwashed. My friend that introduced me to him was also going to run away with me, and we were going to meet the guy in New York. So we arranged it so that I can spend the night at her house that night so we can run away together. That night, we sneak our stuff outside and go for a walk. We were going to walk to the bus station and get tickets all the way up there. We walk a while, but we're going to make the bus, so we loop back around to her house. At this point, she decides she isn't going to go, but convinced me that I should still go. So in the morning, I leave the note from my parents and call a taxi. It picks me up and drives me to the bus station. The driver knew something was up, and he was casually questioning me about where I was going and who I was going to meet. We got to the bus station, and I go inside to buy my ticket. I'm sitting there as the clerk is getting my ticket ready, and my dad pulls up like a bat out of hell. To this day, I am grateful I left that note. He had a hunch that I was going to the bus station and drove so fast that his Astro van was on 2 wheels at some points. My dad gets me and my stuff, and we head home. At this point, I realized just how stupid I had been and break down. My parents asked me all the questions about what was going on and why, and they also called the cops. A few months go by and an FBI agent calls them wanting to talk to me and take the computer. My mom and I talked to the agent for a while, and he informs us that they believe that they have this same guy in custody right now for luring other girls to him. He showed me his photo, and I ID him as the same guy. He takes my computer, but they don't find anything on it but a few conversations since the friend that introduced me to him had wiped it pretty good. Luckily, they didn't need me in court to convict this guy. They had some of the other girls that made it all the way to him. To this day, I am grateful that I left that note and that my dad listened to his instincts and found me before I got on that bus. I also found out that that cab driver waited outside where I couldn't see him because he figured out I was a runaway. I believe he even called the cops and was waiting for them to show up. That man will always have my gratitude. And I was lucky enough that after we told my boyfriend what happened, we got back together. We've been married for 8 years now and have a little girl, and you can bet she will never have a computer in her room, and I will tell her this story when she is old enough. I'm a girl. At the time I was 18, going to school in Northern California. I didn't have a car, so I had to catch 2 buses to get the 20 miles to my school. I took an 8 a.m. class, so I had to catch a 7 a.m. bus transfer to get there on time. So there I am waiting at the Bay Area Rapid Transit train station, waiting for the bus I'm transferring onto to arrive. I'm just sitting on this concrete bench with my headphones on by myself on a cold winter morning. This guy walks by and starts pacing in front of me, smoking a cigarette, but I just ignore him, figuring he's waiting for the same bus. He eventually sits next to me on the other end of the bench, which I still just brush him off as waiting for the bus. He smells kinda bad, but he's a smoker and it's public transit. Then this guy starts talking to me. Now, mind you, I'm still pretending not to be able to hear him until he taps me on my shoulder, scaring the living crap out of me. So I pause my music and take out a headphone to see what he wants. And oh man, do things get weird. Now, some of the specific details of the conversation I've forgotten since it's been 2 years, so bear with me. He asks me what my name is. Lying, I tell him it's something generic like Debbie. He starts talking about how he just got out of jail after being in there for 3 months. He didn't say why, and told me that he saw my face in a Maxim magazine while he was in. Well, crap. All aboard the crazy train, because obviously there was no way that happened. He starts rambling about girls secretly wanting to be with bad guys and said that secretly deep down, I wanted to be with him. Oh God. So a guy comes along who sees me clearly creeped out by this homeless-looking guy and engages him in a conversation to get his focus off of me. Holy Mother of God, I wanted to hug this stranger. I feel like he saved me from something unfortunate. So the bus finally shows up and I get my stuff together to board it, and the creepy dude tells me I should catch the next one and to stay and talk with him. Screw that. Sorry, I have to go get to class. So I sit across from the guy that saved me and thanked him profusely, at which he just said if he saw his girlfriend sitting there being creeped out like that, he'd want someone else to save her too. So thank you, kind stranger. You did me a solid. I ride public transportation. I hate it, but it's my only option right now. With the cost of college books, classes, and everything else under the sun, I couldn't add the toll of gas to that long list of expenditures. I wake up in the morning and catch a bus that takes me into town. I then transfer to another bus that takes me to school. The process is reversed after school. I end up getting on 4 different buses every day, and there's many other stories I could tell about the mysterious and unusual, sometimes disturbing occurrences that happen while traveling on these magical vehicles. This technically started a few months ago, and at the time I thought nothing of it. Once in a while, people will approach me and we'll have a small discussion, but this didn't quite turn out like the other times. I was standing at the bus station waiting for the bus I used to go home to arrive. A short Hispanic man, maybe around 30 to 40 years old, with a thick accent, black hair, crooked smile, and black trench coat was beaming at me about 10 feet from where I was standing. You know that feeling you get when you know someone is about to talk to you, even if they're from afar? This is the feeling I got, and I was right. A few minutes later, he walked toward me and asked where he could get a bus pass. I answered his question, and he asked a few more. The bus at this point pulled in and we were on our way on board. I sat down toward the back because it's more secluded and I like being kept to myself during the hour-long bus ride. Unfortunately, this girl whom had just started coming on thought I was cute or something, I'm a guy, and decided to talk to me the entire ride while being completely disgusting and inappropriate. The windows were foggy, so she decided to write "Boss Babe" on one of them, if that gives you an idea of how immature she is. She thought she was impressing me. I was obviously annoyed and none of the hints I was dropping got through to her. The Hispanic man, who had gotten on the same bus, was sitting a couple of seats across from me, noticed the situation and laughed at me. I smiled back at him and gave him the little, haha, very funny look. She got off the bus and thankfully the terror stopped there. I'm usually the last one to get off the bus. Everyone else is usually dropped off before the bus reaches its final destination, near my house. I was expecting the Hispanic man to get off directly before my stop in town where most of the people get off and either transfer to a link bus that takes them into the country or get off at the corner. To my surprise, the Hispanic man had not gotten off. Even after getting off the bus myself at my own stop, the Hispanic man remained on the bus. This is odd, considering that this is the last and final stop on the route, and the bus turns around and heads back to transfer as this is the end of its long journey. I thought nothing of it, and a few months transpired. The girl still rode on the bus frequently and bothered me to an extent, but other than that, all had been well. I had not seen nor heard from the Hispanic man again. I had been getting unusual activity from my phone, however. My Google account keeps showing that my location is from different parts of my state or city, and search history that I've never looked up lingers in my data. I changed all my passwords, but it still persisted. I checked my device history on Google and saw that an Apple device was connected to my account. Knowing that I don't own an Apple device, I became alarmed. This unusual activity was going on and off, and I had been battling with it for a few weeks, so I decided to get a new email. I'm not sure if this relates to it or not, but it doesn't hurt to explain. Now, this is where it gets weird. A few weeks ago, I was waiting for my bus home again. Just another normal day, nothing interesting happened. My bus pulled in and I started to get on. I paid for my ride and looked for a seat, and that's when I heard my name.
"Johnny, how are you?"
The Hispanic man wearing his same black trench coat sitting in the back of the bus said with his crooked smile.
"Oh, hey,"
I said uncertainly.
"I'm good."
I replied. I was surprised, startled, and completely confused. I never gave out my name to anyone on the bus, and I know for a fact I had never given my name to him. And even if I did, it was a few months ago. How could he have remembered a stranger's name whom he barely came in contact with for months? Alerted, I sat down while he continued to talk to me. The annoying girl got on the bus and had a friend with her. They ended up sitting in front of me. The Hispanic man gave me another smile.
"Hey, you're not gonna go talk with your best friend?"
he said to me jokingly as he talked with her friend.
"Nah, I'm good,"
I said, trying to ignore him by looking out the window. There was a moment of silence from him, and I thought for sure he wouldn't say anything else the rest of the ride. I then turned to my phone and started texting my girlfriend when out of the corner of my eye, I catch him taking a picture of me. I know what you're thinking. How do you know he was taking a picture of you? This man was sitting across 2 seats directly faced toward me with his phone held up high and pointed straight at me. On top of that, I could see in the reflection behind him that he was for sure taking a picture of me. It may have been a video for how long he held it there. I tried to hide my face, but he continued to stay like that. At least 2 or 3 minutes had gone by before he put his phone down and sat normally in his seat again. I texted my girlfriend about what was going on. The moment I sent a text to her saying a crazy guy was taking pictures of me, the Hispanic man started to chuckle while looking at his phone, almost as if though he was somehow seeing what I sent to my girlfriend from his device. Don't worry, this is just beginning.
"So, Johnny, where do you go to school again?"
he said happily.
I'm in college."
I tried to avoid giving him a direct answer.
"Oh, how nice, how nice. What time do you get at college?"
he said with a smile. I couldn't give him any real information, so I proceeded to lie and tell him exactly when I wasn't going to be riding the bus or arriving at school.
"Around 7:30.
I said, trying to seem collected and confident.
Oh, nice. Okay, so what time do you get out of school?
He said with another beaming smile.
Around 12:30?
I fibbed. He continued to ask me question after question, and I proceeded to lie and lie. He honestly asked me over 50 questions in the span of about 15 minutes. I would look out the window, pretend like I'm talking on the phone, etc., but he wouldn't stop asking me personal questions.
You better stay away from this stuff,
he said, leaning over toward me while taking a prescription bottle out of his coat pocket filled with illegal marijuana, flaunting it at me for a few seconds. Shortly after the bus started slowly filling up, each row has 2 seats, and I had my bag on the one next to me in which I wasn't sitting in.
The bus is getting full. I'll save my seat for someone else,
he said, moving my bag out of the way and sitting right beside me. Our legs were touching, and he moved in just the right time so that every seat in the bus was filled. He then proceeded to ask me more and more questions, all personal.
Someday I have a feeling you're going to travel all over the world,
he said, smiling at me with a subtle chuckle. I don't know what he meant by that, but you can only imagine what's going through my head. I started to ask him questions and gathered this information from him in the meantime. He moved from Texas a few months ago to visit his high school friend whom apparently lives up here, and he apparently had been applying for jobs at restaurants that we were conveniently passing at the time. For example, we would pass a Pizza Hut, and then I would hear him say, "I'm applying at Pizza Hut." Some of the places he mentioned were actually going out of business. I stopped asking him questions and at this point just wanted to get home.
Do you have a pair of earbuds?
He asked.
Yeah, at home,
I said.
Here, take these,
he said while pulling these grungy-looking earbuds out of his coat pocket. I took a closer look and examined that they had literally been tampered with electronically. There were wires being shown and part of the casing was missing from the actual bud itself, not to mention that they were extremely dirty. No way was I going to take those earbuds. Based on how weird he's been, they could have been some kind of tracking device for all I know.
No thanks,
I said, trying to sound polite.
Oh, okay,
he said, still smiling.
Would you like some candy?
The man said while pulling out some unnamed candy package in a thin plastic bag. I quickly declined the offer. He kept asking me questions along the rest of the ride, such as,
"What's your last name?"
and,
"Where are your parents? Do you live with them?"
As we got closer to my stop, he explained that he had purchased a house. He even showed me a picture. He just bought a house in my neighborhood and literally lives next door. I told the bus driver a few days later what had happened, and he immediately called the police. They apparently reviewed the bus cameras and verified that I was telling the truth. They confronted him, and I haven't heard from him since. I hadn't rode the bus in a few days, and the bus driver mentioned that he was on the bus again, but at a different time. I asked him what time he had gotten on the bus, and he said at 7:30 and around noon. I have no idea what this guy was trying to do or what he wanted from me. I'm seriously looking for answers. I was around 16 to 17 years old when this happened. For some context, I was a poor high school student studying in a town located around 300 kilometers from my home. Back then I lived in rural Moldavian Republic and studied in Romania, where I had a scholarship to cover most of my expenses. After winter vacation had ended, I was returning home by train. Now the train station was a really desolated place. There weren't any apartment buildings for almost 1 kilometer radius or so. The train arrived at 11 p.m. and the buses circulated until around 11 p.m. This was Romania, so no actual reliable schedule. I was alone, and there was a significant walking distance from the train station to my high school campus and dorm, but taking a taxi was far too expensive for me back then, and I didn't want to bother any of my friends or colleagues. So the stupid teenager I was proceeds to think I can simply walk to the nearest bus station, and if I'm lucky, I'll get a bus. If not, then I'll just walk to the campus, around an hour walk. I got out of the train, and it was a cold, dark night. The area around the train station was completely desolate except for a few Romani shacks, gypsies if you're not familiar with this term, and they're scattered about. I proceed to start walking towards the campus. After a few minutes, I think I hear something behind me and get a dreadful feeling. I ignore it and start walking faster. A few more seconds pass and I can hear someone calling me in a raspy voice.
Hey, beauty. Why in such a hurry? Wait for me.
I'm really creeped out, but I can't find the courage to look behind me, so I start walking even faster. The guy behind me keeps up. I can now hear his footsteps. I get scared and proceed to walk as fast as I can without actually running. I hear him behind me.
Now, that's not nice. Where do you think you're going?
I turn my head and see a dirty, shaggy man looking in his 30s. At this point, I am really scared, beyond trying to keep my calm scared. The area around me is pitch black and silent. There are no houses, no people, and even no streets that have any traffic around. And I don't have a cell phone. This happened more than 10 years ago in Romania, and I was poor. I proceed to run. I run as fast as I can towards the nearest populated circulated street that I can think of. I can hear him running behind me, not only keeping up, but catching up on me. I reach the nearest circulated street and he is 2 steps behind me, yelling angrily,
Where do you think you're going?
2 seconds pass by and I see a small bus passing by. I was nowhere near a bus station, but I started moving my hands and gesturing frantically, trying to get the bus driver to stop. Thankfully, he noticed me and stopped, and just as I closed the door, still panicking, I see the guy grabbing at the door, trying to open it. Too late. The bus starts moving away. I thanked the bus driver profusely. He said he'd noticed the guy running behind me and that I was in a panic, and that's why he stopped. I'm not a religious person, but man, it felt like someone was looking after me and sent the bus in the nick of time to save me.